Hi folks, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now this video is going to be about vitamin D. I've done a number of videos already on vitamin D, and this is a topic that I wanted to cover because it actually goes against what I've said previously. Now I've made it clear that I think that vitamin D is a very important nutrient, and those people that live at high latitudes should take a vitamin D supplement during the winter. During the summer, for most people, there's no real requirement to take vitamin D because your skin is able to synthesize enough vitamin D from the sun, and therefore generally what happens is your levels of 2,5-hydroxyvitamin D, which is the marker used to assess your vitamin D status, that usually goes up in the summer. And then during the winter months, those people at high latitudes, their vitamin D levels tend to drop due to the fact that they're not synthesizing the vitamin D in their skin. So my recommendations up to this point have really been to take vitamin D during the winter months, and therefore this allows you to maintain high levels of vitamin D all throughout the year. But I wanted to make a slight change to that. I've been thinking about this recently, and I wanted to make it clear that there are certain circumstances where I think that you should continue taking your vitamin D supplement throughout the summer months, and this isn't for everybody. It would only be relevant to certain groups within the population, but I just wanted to make it clear that there are cases where you should continue to take your supplement, I think, throughout the year. Firstly, obviously, if you're not exposing yourself to the sun in the summer, there may be various reasons for this, and I'll go into those in more detail later in the video. If you're not exposing yourself to the sun in the summer, then you're clearly not going to be able to synthesize vitamin D, because the ability to synthesize vitamin D comes directly from exposure of your skin to the sun. So what types of people might not expose themselves to the sun during the summer? Well, firstly, the elderly, quite often, particularly if they're in an institution, quite often the elderly don't go out in the sun as much as they could, or as much as they they would like to, perhaps because they're not as mobile as they'd like to, and therefore this may explain why the vitamin D levels of the elderly are particularly low. Many studies have investigated vitamin D levels in the elderly, and they tend to be lower than those people who are younger, and this may simply relate to the fact that the elderly tend not to go out in the sun, and if they do, they tend to feel the cold more, so they tend to put more clothes on. So generally the elderly would not be exposed to the sun, and therefore, if somebody was taking a vitamin D supplement during the winter in order to be able to maintain their vitamin D levels, they may also want to consider taking that throughout the summer, or at least on those days where they're not sitting outside or going outside in the sun. Another group of people that might not be exposed to sunlight in the summer are very young. Quite often children are kept out of the sun, particularly if they're very young. They may be kept in the shade. But this is probably not so relevant, because it might not be that very young children would be taking vitamin D anyway. But there is a crossover point where a child might be taking supplements. There's no reason why children can't take supplements. They're just as useful to children as they are to adults. And if for any reason that they weren't exposed to the sun, during certain months, obviously children spend a lot of time in the classroom, that would stop them being exposed to the sun. So there are various reasons. So this is something that needs to be thought about by the individual. And my general rule, I think I've come to, is that on those days where I'm not going to go outside, or I don't think there is any sun, I tend to take a vitamin D supplement, and then I tend to allow the vitamin D to be produced naturally in my skin on those days where I do go outside and I do expose myself to the sun. And I think that's probably a better strategy than simply saying, well, now it's the summer months, I'm not going to take my vitamin D. It can quite easily be a week of rain during, particularly, where I live in the United Kingdom, there can be a week of rain where vitamin D synthesis levels will be very low. And during that week, it makes sense to me to take a vitamin D supplement. And then, when the weather gets better and you go out into the sun and you're obviously synthesizing vitamin D again, you can start taking your supplement. Another thing to consider is the darkness of your skin. A lot of studies have highlighted that those people with darker skin synthesize lower levels of vitamin D when exposed to the same amount of sunlight. So if you've got very fair skin and you compare a fair skinned person with a very dark skinned person, the person with the dark skin would produce much lower levels of vitamin D. In other words, they need much stronger sunlight in order to be able to synthesize the same amount of vitamin D that you'd get in somebody with fair skin. And in fact, studies have looked at individuals with dark skin, and quite often, even in summer months, they can be deficient in vitamin D. So there's another group of people that may want to consider taking their vitamin D supplement all year round. And again, obviously, the same caveats about being exposed to the sunlight. If you're not exposed to sunlight, that would be even more important. Important for them. Now, there's a last group of individuals that would benefit, I think, from taking a vitamin D supplement during the summer, and those are the people that rely very heavily on sunblock and Suncream. Sunblock and Suncream stops the synthesis of vitamin D in the skin because it prevents certain UV light reaching the skin. So you can inhibit the synthesis of vitamin D if you put, for example, sunblock on your face. You go out in the sun. If it was only your face that was exposed to the sun, that would almost completely stop the synthesis of vitamin D in your body. So if you rely on sunblock during the summer months and you use it a lot, that is going to have a particular impact on your vitamin D levels. And in that case, you may want to consider taking a vitamin D supplement in those summer months. Now, personally, I don't like sun creams and sunblocks. I think it's much better strategy to build up your natural the natural melanin content of your skin by going out and exposing yourself to sun when the sun's weaker in the spring months. If you go out in the spring and you expose your skin to the sun at that point is not hot enough to burn you, and therefore you can build up a tolerance to it. So when the summer comes, you tend not to burn. Now that only works in places in areas where, for example, the sun is not incredibly hot, and for example where there are seasons. If you're living in a very hot country that has maybe closer to the equator, that probably wouldn't work, and you probably would have to rely on some type of sun protection. I understand there are circumstances where, for example, people are working outside. They work outside in very hot countries, and those types of people, they probably would need to take some kind of sunblock in order to be able to stop them burning throughout the day. In those types of in those circumstances, that to me would be a sensible, it'd be a good reason to take a vitamin D supplement if that was part of your lifestyle. So really, it's very difficult to say whether you should take a vitamin D supplement during the summer. My rule of thumb is that if I go out into the sun and I'm exposing my skin to the sun, I tend not to take a vitamin D supplement, and generally throughout the summer I tend to take much less of my vitamin D supplements than I would during the winter. In the winter, I take a supplement almost every day. There's very little chance of the sun being strong enough in the winter to allow the synthesis of vitamin D. The autumn and the spring varies. In the United Kingdom, we can have some some quite nice autumns. We tend to have some quite wet, cold conditions in the spring. So you have to play it by ear to know whether to take your vitamin D supplements. And when you get to the summer, it will depend greatly on your own individual circumstances, but certainly those groups of people that I've mentioned, those people with very dark skin, the elderly that tend not to go out into the sun, and if they do go out, they tend to wear more clothes. Sometimes, under certain circumstances, children, and those people that wear, that use sunblock. And I understand that sometimes that's necessary. Those people, may want to consider taking vitamin D supplement on the days where they're not exposed to the sun. Just very quickly, what can you expect if your vitamin D levels do drop? Well, vitamin D is been very well researched, and it's known now that vitamin D is required for your immune system to work correctly, which is very probably why we tend to get colds and we tend to get infections, particularly upper respiratory tract infections during the winter. So vitamin D is required for your immune system. Your immune system is intimately related to protecting you from diseases like cancer. Certain cancer cells require the immune system to be damaged before they can establish themselves. So if you have a very strong immune system, you are protected a certain amount from certain cancers. So vitamin D has been shown to be inversely associated with the risk of cancer. And then vitamin D is also required for the function of your insulin and your energy utilization systems within cells. So low levels of vitamin D can increase the chance of developing things like insulin resistance, which will therefore increase body weight. And it will also increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, because as your body weight increases, your blood pressure tends to increase, and that increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. So vitamin D is very important. It's protective against short-term respiratory infections. It's protection against major diseases like cancer, type 2 diabetes and obesity, and therefore consideration of your vitamin D levels and how you can maintain them at an optimal level is very important. And of course, vitamin D is a single nutrient. It's really a hormone, but it interacts with other nutrients, particularly vitamin K and vitamin A. And this is why it's very important to look after your diet as a whole. It's very important that you have a very good balanced diet. You can't simply take vitamin D and expect all of the benefits of vitamin D from simply taking a supplement. If you take a vitamin D supplement and you've also got a very good diet, you're taking the other nutrients, those nutrients will act synergistically, and they will protect you in multiple ways from different diseases. So have a think about your own personal circumstances. Decide, whether you think that you need to take a vitamin D supplement. It's very the amount that you take would really vary on your body weight. Current recommendations are to take somewhere around 2000 IU of vitamin D if you're not exposed to sunlight. So I would say that on a day where you don't expose yourself to sunlight for whatever reason, I would say the rule of thumb is to make sure that you have taken in your diet as a whole, whether that's from your multivitamin, your food, or a particularly specific dietary supplement of vitamin D, you need to take as a whole around 2000 IU to maintain your blood levels at the required amount. So I hope you found that interesting. As always, eat well, stay healthy and protect yourself, and I will see you soon for another video. Take care.